Hey friends, welcome to the In Focus podcast, a show for photographers who are looking to grow and scale a photography business that feels good. I'm your host, Gina, a wedding and elopement photographer, industry educator, coach, and most importantly, your friend. On this show, we'll dive into actionable strategies, industry trends, and all things photography related so you can leave each episode feeling inspired and in focus.
Today, we are diving into something that might not seem glamorous, but is absolutely critical: your wedding photography contract. I know contracts can feel overwhelming or feel overly formal, especially when you're in the early stages of your business. Like, I remember getting started and I was kind of like, I don't know if I'm ready for like a real full contract yet, or like, when should I invest in that contract? Trust me, I know the struggle. But after 10 years of full-time wedding photography, I can tell you firsthand that your contract is one of the most important tools that you have to protect your business, your time, your peace of mind, and it's absolutely essential for your business. So in this episode, I'm going to walk you through 4 surprising real-life moments where I had to actually go back to my contract and refer to the actual words in it. And I was so glad that I had the right things in place to protect me. Plus, we're going to talk about verbiage to include, language to avoid, and 5 must-haves every photography contract should cover. If your contract could use a tune-up or you're still winging it out there, this one's for you. Let's get into it. Before we dive into this, just a little disclaimer: I am not a lawyer and I'm not pretending to be. I am going to be speaking at you from the experiences that I've had as a business owner, a wedding photographer over the last decade. I do recommend that you have an actual lawyer create your contract, or at the end of the episode, I have a special offer for you guys for the legal pages contracts. So before we dive into the stories today, I want to talk a little bit about why contracts are so much more than just a formality in your business. You see, the thing about a good contract is that it actually sets clear expectations for both you and your clients. It protects you from liability, confusion, and misunderstandings. It gives you a roadmap for what to do when unexpected things happen. And it helps you maintain boundaries and enforce policies within your business. And a key thing here is enforcing those policies. I know it's really easy to have these contracts in place, and then when something happens, it's like you have to actually go back, read what your contract says, and stand behind it and know and believe that your contract's going to uphold, that it supports you, and that you can trust that it will protect you. One of the biggest lessons that I've learned is that a contract is only as helpful as your understanding of it. So it's great to have these clauses that sound impressive, but what really matters is what happens when you have to enforce them. So when a client comes back and asks you, hey, what does this mean in your contract? Or, this is happening, we need to do this with our service booked XYZ. When you go back in, can you clearly explain and understand like what your contract is saying? So I'm going to give a few examples of a few times in my business when I've had to actually revert back to my contract and see what the word said, and then one example from one of my friends. So my first example, this was definitely one that will happen in pretty much every wedding photography business. But last year I had a couple decide to cancel their wedding. So this happens. It totally happens in the course of my career. I think I've only had about 5 cancellations for different various reasons. But last year, it'd been a while since I'd had one. I mean, since COVID. But last year I did have one. And I knew I had a cancellation clause in my contract, but it'd been a while since I'd like really sat down and read through it. And here's what happens is when somebody reaches out to cancel or reschedule or whatever, it forces you to go back to your contract and be like, okay, so what does this mean? So I knew I had a cancellation clause in my contract. I did have to go back through and read it and just make sure that I knew what the procedure was and what I'd promised and what we'd agreed on at the time of booking. And luckily, my contract had my back. I didn't owe them anything back, and they knew that as well because they read the contract when they booked me, and that expectation was already set. So it's just a good and easy example of like one thing that will definitely happen within your career and why a contract is so important. I also had a photographer friend of mine, and she had a situation where a guest, we're going to call him Uncle Bob, stepped in front of her during the wedding ceremony and blocked that first kiss shot. So it was actually a church wedding, and so there's like the pews. So she really didn't have like a ton of wiggle room, and he was about 6 rows back from the front. She was in the back. And so the amount of space he actually took up in the photo was like actually pretty significant. I was asking her about it, and she's like, yeah, he didn't actually like cause a problem the rest of the ceremony. It was just that one shot. And it's so funny. You would think like an Uncle Bob bringing a fancy camera to a wedding like would understand that as well. Like, he gets photography. He has a somewhat sense of wedding photography. He would know that's the shot. I mean, obviously he did. He took it. But he would know that there's a photographer out there trying to get it. It just blows my mind. People blow my mind. But anyways, so she did not have the first kiss shot. Like, there was no way to Photoshop them from behind Uncle Bob, right? Luckily, she did have a photo of them as they recessed out of the church. They did a little dip kiss after they passed him, Uncle Bob. So she did have that shot. So there was like a little bit of comfort in that. But she ended up delivering the gallery, and the couple ended up reaching out to her, and they were actually pretty upset about it. So they were kind of asking about a partial refund. They were like really just wanting that first kiss shot, which every couple gets. Like, I totally get it. It's a really understandable thing to be upset about. So she had to refer back to her contract, and she did have a clause in there that it protected her from guest interference. So it stated that coverage limitations and photographer responsibility in cases where guests obstruct coverage, like, she was covered. So she was able to refer back to that clause, and it really helped reset the expectations and keep things civil for them. Another example, this is example number 3. Like so many of us, 2020 tested literally every part of our businesses. My contract's force majeure clause and rescheduling terms became my lifeline. And honestly, I didn't even know what that was until 2020. And then the legal page had our backs with contracts and covered everything. So I had couples rescheduling 2 different years, asking for full refunds, needing clarification on what was covered. So because I had a solid, detailed contract, I had answers ready. And that alone reduced my stress tenfold. But I think one thing in this regard that happens, and where photography contracts can kind of miss the mark, is they stop at just having the clause in the contract. So you also need to be clear on what happens if that clause has to be enforced. So what happens to the money that's already been paid? How long is that valid for? Is there a credit period or an expiration period? So all of that needs to be spelled out, so you're not having to make last minute decisions in the middle of chaos. You don't want to have to be going back and like backtracking and making things up after an issue or a problem has happened, and now you're trying to like do cleanup duty. So you want it all in there nicely, very clear to understand upfront. And lastly, my 4th example is when I found out I was pregnant for the first time, and then for the second time as well. So both pregnancies, I did end up having to cancel a wedding or two. And so with the first pregnancy, I'd never had to do that before. So I had no idea like really what my procedure was going to be. And I did not exactly know what my contract was covering. It was kind of like a little bit of a surprise situation. So I did have to go back into my contract, read through like, where does it fall in my contract when I cancel because of a pregnancy? And like, luckily, just so happened that was already spelled out in my contract because I had such a solid contract backing my business. Essentially, it covered my right to cancel for medical reasons, what kind of notice I had to give, and how refunds and replacements were going to be handled. So there was no questions there on what I needed to do and then what my clients could expect from me in that situation. The clarity around it really gave me confidence to communicate and pivot quickly. But again, it wasn't something that I had to execute on until that moment. And I was so grateful to have a contract that protected me. I think a bonus consideration with contracts would be that your contract should evolve with your business. What protected you 3 years ago may not be enough today. One of the newer additions that I've added in has been an artistic style clause, because as we grow, so does our style, our editing, or our gear, etc. So we need to protect ourselves in case a client returns months later upset that anything has changed or evolved in your business. Lately, I've seen through the social media grapevine a rise in defamation or social media blasting. Sepia Bride, I don't even want to talk about it. But I mean, I've seen it in other instances too. I saw this workshop recently. I think it was like in Ireland or Scotland. And the attendees like absolutely blew up the workshop host, or tried to at least. And I'm not saying that they were right or wrong. I'm just saying that from a business standpoint, having some sort of protection in that case is super important, because unfortunately, public reviews or negative social media posts can hurt your business even when you've upheld your end of the agreement. So having clear language about respectful resolution, dispute handling, or even legal resource can give you another level of protection in your business. It's not always about expecting the worst. I think it's more about knowing how you'll handle it if it comes. That clarity will save your business, your reputation, and your sanity. Let's talk about contract language, because not all legal sounding language is helpful, and some can actually leave you vulnerable. Again, I'm not a lawyer. These are things that I've learned in the years of doing business in regards to my contract, okay? But here's some verbiage that I've learned that I should not have in my contract. Words like as soon as possible or within a reasonable time. These phrases tend to be vague and they can be interpreted differently. I think another one that I once had that got changed with my most recent contract was all images will be delivered in full. So like, what does full really mean? You need to be more specific than that with your contract terms. Another one was client agrees to be understanding. This is generally not enforceable and it's very subjective. So anything that's vague like that, it's just not enforceable if you ever did have to like fall back on it. How I kind of adjusted some of this verbiage, using words like gallery delivery within 8 weeks with a maximum delivery window of 12 weeks. So that not only gives that range with like really clear numbers, but it also sets expectations for my clients. Another one was a photographer is not liable for missed moments due to interference from guests or venue restrictions, because that's something that can totally happen. Another one, non-refundable retainer of blank percent is due at booking to reserve the date and is applied towards the total balance. So I think another one that you learned about just through the interwebs is using the word retainer and not deposit. And lastly, in the event of the photographer illness or emergency, a qualified replacement will be provided or refund issued per the cancellation clause. And then again, just being really clear on what your cancellation clause is. It's all about having this like clear, enforceable, specific language. And that's what's going to actually protect you. And again, getting a contract from a really reliable and dependable source is a great place to just know you are using the correct words and sentences that are enforceable. So when I look at my contract, while every clause and part of it has its purpose, I think there are 5 must-haves that should be in every wedding photography contract. For me, I think the biggest one is having that rescheduling and cancellation terms. Clearly define what happens if the client cancels, reschedules, or if you have to cancel due to an emergency. So I think those should actually be in there almost separately as well. So the client, what happens if the client does it, and what happens if you have to do it. Make sure it's clear, make sure it's understandable, make sure you understand it. Second, image delivery timelines. Set expectations for how long editing and delivering will take and include language about delays beyond your control. So just cover your butt in terms of if anything happens, hard drives fail, etc. Life happens, life lives, and make sure that you have some extra lead time in there if delays happen. Number 3 was limit of liability and guest interference. So protect yourself if something out of your control impacts the final product. 4, payment schedule and refund policy. Lay out when payments are due, what portion is non-refundable, and what happens with partial work. And lastly, number 5, copyright and usage rights. So just state who owns the images, how clients can use them afterward, and your right to use them in your marketing material. This issue is actually happens a lot with venues, and it's mostly because they're just not aware of or don't fully understand how the intellectual rights work with creators and artists and photographers. So a lot of the time you'll see in venue contracts, and they will send this to their clients, and it will say something about along the lines of they own the rights to use the images afterward in their marketing. And as a venue, like I can understand it because they want the photos. They want to be able to use the photos and share them for their own marketing. They need the photos. But what is important to note is that as a photographer, you legally own the copyright and intellectual property of any photos the moment that you take it. And that's just how it is. So it's good for you to know that. So the moment you take a photo, you own the copyright and intellectual property of it. So if a venue wants to use the photos for marketing, they do need to get that from you and they need that approval. And whether you give that to them for free or charge them a price, that's just your own business decision, but they don't own the rights of that. So I think that comes up a lot. Couples will often reach out to me and ask. And I think the other thing with that is when they do reach out to you and ask, you don't want to create drama around it. I always just say like, thank you for bringing this to my attention and checking in with me before you agree to anything. I'll do like a really light mention of like, due to the legalities surrounding copyright ownership, this isn't something that you and your partner can legally agree to, but I'm happy to continue the conversation with the venue and work with them on this matter. And so I try to just make it as easy and light on them, letting them know that legally I own the copyright intellectual property rights. They have the right afterward to use them for their personal use, but they are unable to sign those rights to another business for commercial use. So, and then again, just letting them know that I am happy to speak to the venue and explain all of this in my own terms. You never want to put the couple as the middleman between you and the venue, and simply just ask the couple, maybe they can just contact you. You and the venue can figure it out. So there's a few different clauses that go into this, but I think making sure somewhere in your contract that those are included is something that as a wedding photographer, I know that I've had to refer back to. Each of these clauses helps you stay professional, protect your time and your art and your business. So if you're listening to this and you're realizing that your contract might need a tune-up or you don't have one at all, I want to share a resource that makes it easy. I use contract templates from the legal page. They're written by Paige Griffith. She's a lawyer who actually understands the photography industry. Her wedding photography contract template is incredibly thorough, up to date, and easy to plug into your business. Right now, the legal page is having their biggest sale of the year, 40% off the entire shop. With code GINA10, you can take extra money off at discount. It includes all scenarios we talked about today and more. Plus, she has added clauses that you can really build out a contract for exactly what you need. For example, if you're an adventure elopement photographer, there are likely some specific clauses that you might need if you're taking clients into the mountains, leading them on an adventure, or if you're a family photographer and are interacting with children. Like, there's just different things you have to think about and have covered in your contracts. So she also has an amazing free Facebook group that you can jump into and learn from as well as opportunity for further support if needed. So it's just something I would definitely recommend. Do not miss out on this sale as well. You're going to be kicking yourself when it's over if you do miss out. It's one of the best investments that I've made for my business, and I'm confident that it'll be one of yours too. I'm going to drop the link in the show notes, but she's the legal page and you can check it out there. Contracts are not just for worst case scenarios. They are for peace of mind. They are for clarity and professionalism. You never know when you'll need to refer back to your contract, and you'll be so glad that you have strong language in place when you do. Whether it's a pregnancy or a pandemic or a guest with a camera or something that you never saw coming, your contract is your safety net. If this episode helped you, screenshot it, tag me on Instagram, let me know you're listening. And if you don't have a contract you feel confident in, please go check out the templates from the legal page. They will seriously change your business and have your butt covered. Thank you for listening, and I will see you in the next one.